Hello, everyone. Welcome to our next presentation in our series of webinar forums on managing stress. This is a joint production of the Department of Psychiatry, the University of Iowa Hospitals and Clinics COPE team, and the University of Iowa Employee Assistance Program. I am your facilitator, Dr. Laura Fuller, Clinical Associate Professor in the Department of Psychiatry and Division Director for the Psychology Division in that department. The plan for today is for our presenter to share helpful information with you, the viewer, for 15 to 20 minutes. There will be time for a limited number of questions at the end. Further resources will be available on the hospital website. Important information about today's presentation. This webinar is provided for educational and informational purposes only and does not constitute providing medical or professional services. If you think you may have a medical emergency, call 911 or go to your emergency room. No provider-patient relationship is created by this webinar or its use. Neither the University of Iowa nor its employees nor any contributor to this webinar makes any representations or warranties express or implied with respect to the information provided herein or to its use. Now, on to our program. The topic for today is applying acceptance and commitment principles during this COVID-19 pandemic. If you've recently been feeling like you're weathering a storm of emotions, maybe even a hurricane, then today's presentation will give you some ideas for weathering that storm. Our presenter today is Dr. Lauren Garvin, Assistant Professor in the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Iowa. Dr. Garvin works in the palliative care program, bariatrics, and transplant services. She's also active in clinical teaching and research. She has expertise in several evidence-based therapy approaches, including the ACT model, about which she is speaking today. And here to tell you more, without further ado, is Dr. Garvin.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction, and I'd like to thank those of you who are tuned in live right now. I'd also like to thank you if you're watching this at a time that's more workable in your life. And either way, you have made a choice to set aside 20 minutes or so to be here together and to talk about our topic today, which is an approach by Dr. Russ Harris, an author and trainer in acceptance and commitment therapy, called Face COVID. And this truly is about coping effectively with the COVID-19 crisis. And, you know, if you're anything like me, you've found yourself noticing either from the news, media, people's statements, other kinds of sources, these topics of coping effectively and self-care. And you may, if you're like me, have had that thought, well, what does that mean? How do I cope? How would I know I was doing it? And what if I really was overwhelmed? What do I do right there in that moment? You may have even found yourself 20 minutes down the line thinking, this is so distracting. Lost 20 minutes sitting here and I was just, meaning to relax or focus on this task. And the purpose of today is to review this framework for coping because this crisis has been unfolding and is anticipated to continue. And the approach that we'll discuss is new, but the basis is not. So first, I'll talk a little bit about acceptance and commitment therapy, and then describing this that has such a foundation in theory and research before this specific application. Then we'll transition and go into those topics. And it's important to know that there's not one way to approach coping effectively, and this is one way to think about and see if it may have an application. If we start a bit on acceptance and commitment therapy, which is a therapy developed originally by American psychologist Stephen Hayes, and there have been great contributions from other psychologists as well. And knowing that many therapies exist as frameworks to really guide the process of change. When someone is experiencing distress or difficulties or struggle in their life, acceptance and commitment therapy, which we call ACT, invites us to step into a process where we purposefully slow down and take a look at the role of choice in our own lives. And it really involves asking ourselves, what have I been doing? What am I choosing? And how has it been working for me? And what have been the costs or consequences of my choice? And so this process really invites us to slow down and clarify for ourselves personally, if life was just as I wanted it to be, if I was really living meaningfully, what would that look like? What would I be doing? And with that in mind, how are my daily choices related to that outcome? Are there ways for me to be most effective in cultivating that life and creating that life? And so it's quite interesting because a lot of times ACT then incorporates a lot of processes and experiments to kind of notice thoughtfully, when I'm making choices day to day, am I making them primarily to spare myself from feeling stress, distress, anxiety, the possibility for failure? Am I choosing things that help me avoid uncomfortable thoughts and feelings in the short term? Or am I making choices that may be more toward the end of creating a meaningful life for myself? So really, ultimately, the goal is to foster making very intentional choices that have to do with our personal values, even if it may means that we may feel worry or experience sorrow or notice thoughts that I might fail and carry those along the way with us. And so it may be about really being most effective, which is pretty interesting because oftentimes for many individuals who are engaging in an ACT therapy, the immediate goal may not be feel happy 100% of the time. It may be rather that the goal of therapy is about creating a life that's really worth living. And that can mean then that the true process of therapy is about creating a relationship with the internal experiences that we have that may not be the things that we would really, really invite into our day-to-day lives on purpose. For some of us, may not be dreaming of feeling really stressed out, but rather we can notice the internal experiences we have for what they are, spend a little bit less time wrestling with our internal world and more time being effective in choosing behaviors that work toward our goals and what matter to us in life. And so we think about it, it's very interesting because a lot of research in ACT has shown that if the goal of therapy is creating a life worth living, it may be that some people ultimately experience in the research literature both ends, that their life may be more meaningful and richer and closer to their values. And there may also be impact on those mood and thought-based experiences as well. And ACT as a therapy has significant research support for benefiting multiple kinds of concerns that people experience, whether they may be mood-based, chronic pain, and so on. And so it's rooted in a deep kind of theory and research and practice. And so with that, Dr. Russ Harris developed a very specific application that is an acronym that is FACE COVID. It is about this effective coping strategy in the face of the COVID-19 crisis. And so we'll go through step by step each of the letters with some action items to truly hopefully make this applicable. And there will also be resources provided at the end that will be available as well. So starting to step into the F. So F is really about focusing on what is in our control. So the COVID-19 crisis, it has the potential to very seriously affect us personally. It has the possibility to affect us personally in a financial way, in a social way, how we're engaging with others, emotionally, the kinds of experiences that we're having. And each person will also encounter broader challenges that come with widespread illness or changes in social structures, economic fallout. Many of these experiences are very much out of our control. And what about thoughts and feelings? Can we always choose those and have direct control over them? Always. So if, for example, I say, Mary had a little, did your mind try to fill in the blank? Or if a bus was cruising straight at you on the street, would your automatic reaction be calm peacefulness, calculating that angle the bus is coming in, or would it be an instinct to jump right out of the way? oftentimes what we know is that emotional experiences, thoughts, they can be out of our direct control under all circumstances. They may be a little bit more automatic than that. And they're often there because we're living and breathing human beings who live complex lives. And these things can come up, particularly in a situation like many of us are in right now. In a crisis like this, that can be very uncertain and very out of our control. Fear and anxiety are very common, normal, and natural emotional experiences. And so where we need to pay attention is if what can happen to some of us is we can get kind of lost in a mode where we're really rooted in those internal experiences. We're playing out scenarios in our head. Well, what would I do if this happened? How will I plan and adjust? When I walk in today, what exactly am I going to do? What's going to be the moment? And we kind of go blank and sometimes notice, wait, what was I doing? What was I doing when I started thinking about all of that? So the trouble we can find ourselves in sometimes is that it's not especially helpful or effective for us to get into this zone where we're only living up in our minds, worried thoughts and feelings for long periods of time, because many of these scenarios are out of our control, or at least exactly when, where, how, and why may be out of our control. So the F, focus on what's in our control, asks us to slow down and notice, well, when I had that thought, was that out of my control? Was it in my control? Did I just have that thought? Was the decision that local government made that my news flashed to me on my phone in my control? Was it even in my control when the phone showed it to me? Was I expecting to see it at that moment? And when we ask ourselves this question to focus on what's in our control, we actually notice that for most adults within our day, our entire day is a series of 1,000 choices. We may feel as though it's part of our routine, but in truth, we're choosing if we brush our teeth, and we're choosing if we pull a sock on our foot. And so when we become aware of the role of our own choices, we can really begin to focus on those parts of our lives that are within our control, which is what we do here and now. So the F asks us, is this in my control? Yes or no? If it is, where I can place my behavior is how I'll choose to live, respond, and personally act. And that's where we have the most power in focusing our efforts. And so then the question, about, well, what happens if emotions start to change? And emotions can be quite a bit like a storm when we planned to be doing something outdoors. Storms can be unpredictable. They can be intense. They can be long or short, and they can sometimes show up right when we were planning on doing something else that was really important to us. And so in a storm, it can be very important to ground ourselves, which is where the ACE comes in. The ACE is also within a broader picture of something called dropping anchor, which I'll touch back on at the end of the webinar today. But the idea in a storm is that, we can anchor ourselves, and when we really plant ourselves in the here and now, that can free us up to that F, to focus on what's in our control and engage in our behavior. So even, to describe the A, if we go back to that storm, when I talked about it, that's what I called it, a storm. But I didn't really observe and describe it. So if a child were to come up next to me staring out the window and say, what's going on out there? I could say, well, I see large raindrops. I see gray clouds. There are also some white clouds farther in the distance. I see the trees bending, and I see leaves blowing in the wind. And that would be a descriptive account of the storm. And that is exactly the process of A, acknowledge your thoughts and feelings. Even when we're feeling overwhelmed or worried, we can often acknowledge our feelings just as we describe the parts of the storm. We can observe them. We can say, I feel angry. I feel my heart beating a little faster. I can feel my jaw clenched. And just by describing, we're acknowledging thoughts and feelings without trying to change them. And so that's the process of A. And C asks us, once we've noticed those internal experiences, to come back into your body. And the purpose of this isn't to avoid those thoughts and feelings, but rather expand our awareness back into the body around them. And so I'll invite you right now, if you're willing, no matter where you are, if your feet are on the ground, to really, really push your feet down in the ground and feel that contact below you. Maybe to straighten up your spine, whether you're sitting or standing. Shrug your shoulders, roll your head a bit. To just notice your breath as it is. And now we've expanded our awareness back into our bodies. And E is the part where we engage fully in what we're doing. So if mental and emotional experiences have pulled us into that autopilot mode, which they may tend to do, or have us up in daydreams or in a kind of a frozen state for a moment, we did the work of acknowledging those parts, the thoughts and feelings, and coming back in. Now, there was something in the here and now that each of us are doing. Whether it was a person driving to their mailbox or sitting at our desk working on an action plan, even reading a book with someone. If you're back in your body, in the here and now, if you want to, you can choose to engage back in what you were doing. And oftentimes we do that by expanding even a little bit further. So through our five senses, actually engaging in this moment in what we're doing. And so doing that, I'll invite you again to look around and to notice maybe 3 to 4 colors you can see with your eyes. Maybe to notice a sound that you hear around you. The taste in your mouth. Any smells. And here we are, back right in this moment. And now that we're grounded here, almost like we've dropped an anchor within the storm, we can choose to engage in what we're doing. So a very interesting question comes up for the COVID portion of Dr. Harris's acronym, which is, now that we are present in the here and now, in these circumstances, in every single person's life, how and what do we choose? How do we choose what we want to engage in? So the C is something called committed action. And committed action speaks to the things that we do, the actions that we take that are chosen because they're very important to us in our lives. We do them even if difficult thoughts and feelings show up. And committed action, quite simply, asks us the question, if I've decided this is important, how do I translate it into behavior and do it regularly? And what can I do right now that would improve life for me, for those I love, or my community? And the answer is very different for everyone. If you're going to be spending time at home, how do you want that to be the best use of your time? Maybe cooking a nutritious meal, adding in stretching your legs twice a day. What is not, the important part is that there's one answer. What is the important part is that it's in our control to not only choose what matters to us, but to do it and do it regularly, to commit to it and engage in it fully. The O is a very interesting part. So opening up very broadly really pertains to those thoughts and feelings that show up for us. And again, we can almost guarantee that during a crisis, thoughts and feelings we otherwise may not invite or hope to have in day-to-day life may show up. So knowing and acknowledging that they're common is an important part of opening up. And it's not where the process of opening up ends. There's a second part that comes to not only noticing that thoughts and feelings are there and allowing them to be there with kindness toward ourselves. So many of us have the experience where we follow up on a thought or feeling we notice about how we should be feeling in this moment, or a reason why it did show up, or blaming ourselves or circumstances for their existence. And opening up, oftentimes, we can put it into action by asking ourselves the question, if someone I cared about so dearly was feeling this way in this circumstance right now, and I wanted to treat them with kindness and care, how would I act toward them in this moment? And that can be a portion of opening up to ourselves by applying that same kind of how we would treat others toward ourselves in that moment. And if we talk about V, the V is a very important part of ACT as well as Dr. Harris's acronym. V is about knowing our values. So in ACT and in this coping system, values are essential. They involve asking ourselves, in a world where everything is not in my control, what do I want to stand for? What do I want life to be about? And the kind of person I want to be in my life and in this crisis? How do I want to treat others? And people choose very different values. For some people, in experiences such as these ones, having humor is very important to them as they face changes and difficult times. For some people, it's kindness and courage that's extremely important. And knowing your values is one of the most important portions, because when we do know them, it involves asking ourselves, so this has come on. I've acknowledged thoughts and feelings. And when storms set in, even when they're terrible storms or really unfortunate timing, values are like a compass that can point our way through fog, rain, dark times, and reconnect us with, at minimum, our direction. And values are just the same as that. When circumstances change, knowing our values are like the compass. They remind us of our personal direction. And again, knowing is one piece. It's important to ask ourselves, if this is the kind of person I want to be, how can I turn this into behavior, even when I'm noticing thoughts and feelings showing up or circumstances are changing? So the IND are slightly more brief, and they're truly consistent with a lot of guidelines that many of us have received. I is about identifying resources, and identifying resources can really help guide the most workable and effective actions. So when life and circumstances change, when we operate under new and changing guidelines, it's very helpful to identify resources to help us cope, support along the way. They can guide our adjustments. The important part about identifying resources is that there are likely more resources out there than any of us may have time to review and utilize. It's very important that we find the ones that are reliable and trustworthy. So identifying reliable and trustworthy resources is important, just as the D. So D is a component that is absolutely essential with the COVID-19 crisis, as we've heard time and time again, to disinfect and distance. Practicing hand hygiene from the guidelines we're receiving, social distancing in a way that is safe and workable for personal lives and responsibilities, and keeping in mind that disinfecting and distancing is about physical disinfecting and distancing, not emotional disinfecting and distancing. And so remaining emotionally connected, being supported and supporting others is very important during this time. It can also be really useful for people to consider, since everyone has different values that are chosen and they're personal, and we all have our own compass. Do the disinfecting and distancing guidelines, can we relate that behavior back to those values? You know, if I'm a person who's chosen kindness, is disinfecting and distancing every time I do it a place where I can remind myself, this is a part of my values. I'm doing this and it connects me with my kindness. So with that, we have covered each component of the FACE COVID acronym. And to finish, there will be a resource list, and it includes a number of different tools for people. There is first a free video that is from the creator, Dr. Russ Harris, that covers the acronym again. And we're also providing a values inventory from Dr. Russ Harris. A values inventory can be a great place to dig into personal values. There are also recordings that go through that ACE. And with that, I'll thank everyone for their time very much. It's been my pleasure, and I wish you well.
Dr. Garvin, thank you so much. That was very interesting. I liked the part about being kind to ourselves the way that we would be kind to someone who was dear to us. I have a few questions for you.
Great.
So I think the first one that I wanted to ask or relay on to you was, it's one thing to hear you talk about this and to think, oh yeah, I want to do this every day. I really want to live my life this way. But when we get out into the thick of things, how can we remember to actually act according to our values and to do some of the things that you talked about in our daily lives?
Yeah. Oh, just hearing that question just brings up about probably 1,000,001 thoughts that I've had personally. And it's so interesting about, we do live very busy lives, and sometimes we set out with one intention, and somewhere along the way, things may change. I think about a few things when a question like that comes my way. So one is that even when we're busy, sometimes we do have supportive things that don't forget. So sometimes we can set something like a cell phone reminder, or use things like a smartwatch if we're someone who enjoys things like that, that can buzz us throughout the day and remind us, at one point, a version of you decided they wanted to try something and you took the time to set this alarm. And so it may be worth doing that now. And so actually using assists like that can be very important. And also just encouraging, we went over so many points in that acronym today. To employ this in a way that is very consistent with the acronym would be to do it flexibly and to try to do it effectively. So sometimes if we set the goal, I'm going to do every part of this entire acronym 10 times a day, we may ask ourselves, how well would that work for me? And wonder if there's a place, how would I maybe start in a way that sets me up for success? If I were to choose, for example, the values piece, I could start there. And so making it scalable in behavior so that we're setting ourselves up for success to implement things at a rate that works for us.
Thank you so much. That was helpful. Next question. How do you know that what you're doing is effective? You talked about acting effectively. How do you know that it's effective?
Yeah, what a great question. So this is a very important thing to be thinking about, right? Because everything we do, in some way, we're doing it for some reason, right? So I could flick that light switch on right now, and I may be doing it because it's important to me to be extremely well lit in this webinar. And that would be an effective behavior, I hope. But I wouldn't know until afterward. It's possible that if I turn this light on, it may do that thing that it then totally grays out my entire appearance. So to know that we're being effective involves not only knowing this was the choice, also knowing the intention, but then being able to ask, how did it work? So to be able to assess with ourselves, I chose this behavior. Well, in the short term, what happened right after? What did I notice? Did it move me closer to those values? What about in the long term? Did that move me closer to my values? So to really know if we're being effective involves actually looking at the consequences of our behavior. How did it work in the short term? Was it consistent with where you wanted to be with your values? And how did it work in the long term? Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. And that's where we can make our adjustments and be flexible.
Thank you. Last question, and I think this may link up with some of the resources that will be on the website, but how do you know which of your values is primary in a situation?
Yeah, that's pretty important, and it brings me back to the fact that for some of us who have many different things that we've decided are important to us in life, life's kind of like a buffet. We can walk up to it and we can look at all the choices, and we could probably spend a lot of time trying to decide what exactly to put on our plate in that moment. And we also need to be mindful of how much time we're spending waiting to decide, right? So that's really important. And it may be that in the moment, it's very clear to us based on our responsibilities in the moment that is what's most important. So right now in this moment, a value that's very important to me is, communication and connecting with others. Now, in this moment, that also means that my value of being a really great pet owner is not immediately at the forefront. And so what it does involve actually is, in fact, making a choice. And just like being effective, we can then figure out, in terms of the consequences, was that my best choice in the moment? And the next time I approach my next behavior, just like the buffet, do I want to load something different on? Do I want to make a different choice next time? The values inventory can be very, very helpful in looking at, just for you, what kinds of things are the most important? And maybe it is that it's not one person or one goal, but rather a way you want to be as a person. And so, in fact, it may be a way that you can carry it through lots of different parts in your day so that it can kind of remain primary in some ways.
Thank you. So we're at the end of our time today. I want to thank you very much, Dr. Garvin, and to our tech team for putting this together today. We appreciate your sharing practical steps that we can all take to respond to the coronavirus. A recording of today's live stream, as well as links to additional resources related to Face COVID, will be included on the loop today. On Thursday, we'll be joined by Jennifer Clark, who will be discussing stress and insomnia. Until then, take care, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Thanks.
Thank you.